Okay, now with Mark Carney at the helm, people are wondering how the Liberals will fare in an upcoming election. So for more on how that might play out, we've reached President of Research Co. Mario Canseco in Vancouver. Mario, good to talk to you.
Great to be here with you, Sarah. Thank you.
So Mark Carney, officially new Prime Minister of Canada. In the lead up to this, the Liberals have seen, I would call it a surprise rise in the polls. It's kind of been exceptional to see the excitement around that party. But the question I have had is, can this be sustained? Is this going to stand now that he's actually Prime Minister?
Well, that will depend a lot on the way people react to the early stages of his premiership. You know, we've had a situation where he's getting a lot of coverage. People are getting to know him. We saw in our last survey that we had 23% of people across Canada who said, I was leaning towards voting for the Conservatives, but the fact that Justin Trudeau is no longer there makes me think about it twice. So establishing an emotional connection with voters, especially in an election that is going to be dominated, whether we like it or not, by whatever Donald Trump tweets tomorrow.
Well, then I just want to pick up on that, because that's what Rosemary was just talking about. In fact, that's going to be a main point, if not almost the only one, potentially, as we move through an election. Who do you think Canadians would vote for based on current trends?
Well, there's a complexity for the Conservatives to try to essentially paint themselves as very different from Donald Trump. On an ideological standpoint, we had Conservative voters who were significantly more likely to have a favorable view of Donald Trump than those who voted for the Liberals or the NDP. That has changed dramatically since the tariff war. And that is something that is going to be problematic for the Conservatives, because you will see a contrast of styles. You know, Pierre Poilievre is more of a firebrand. He likes to yell and to say specific things that he wants to see happening. And what we've seen from Mark Carney is a more subdued way of dealing with issues. So that contrast is definitely going to play a role in how Canadians feel about who they want to see winning this election.
If you look right across the country, where do you think, what are the regions where maybe Mark Carney sees more resistance than others?
I think the cabinet sends a pretty obvious signal that Ontario is the battleground. A lot of the ministers are from there. I think there's going to be a lot of time spent there. I think the Liberals are looking at this as a situation where they're trying to entice the voters who supported the Liberals in 2015 during Trudeau-mania 2 to come back into the fold. You know, maybe you weren't happy with the way we were doing things in 2019 and 2021, but you can come back into the fold. And if we get a majority of those seats in Ontario, then we don't need much more elsewhere. It's also important to note that the way in which Canadians are following the tariff war is significant. More than 80% who are paying attention to the story. So we could have an election with a larger voter turnout, which is something that we haven't had since 1988.
Picking up on Ontario, Premier Ford embraced Carney. He has said that he's described him as an extremely astute business mind. And I'm wondering, do you think that, does that sway voters in Ontario, or doesn't it?
Well, I think it will definitely play a role. You know, if you have some of those sound bites of Doug Ford saying nice things about Mark Carney, Stephen Harper saying nice things about Mark Carney, that could be part of the campaign of the Liberals to say to people, look, this isn't the boogeyman from some sort of other universe that is not relatable to the people who you supported in the past. It's also about how do you establish that emotional connection with middle-aged voters. What we saw was people who were young, either 18 to 34, or middle-aged, 35 to 54, looking at the Conservatives as an option 2 or 3 months ago. Now that changes, and it's ultimately about the way in which Mark Carney tries to talk to this group, because they're struggling and they're trying to figure out who's going to save them from the menace that is Donald Trump right now.
What about Quebec? I mean, I know Ontario is always important. Quebec often, though, is very important. And I know Prime Minister Carney has made great strides in terms of his French. At least that's what I understand from those who've paid a close attention to his understanding of the language. But Pierre Poilievre, he started his press conference today, and I think it clocked about 8 minutes of fluent French off the top before he even started to speak English. So how are Quebec voters likely to react to the new Liberal leader?
The Federalist vote tends to go back and forth between the Conservatives and the Liberals, to a lesser extent towards the NDP back in the 2011 election under Jack Layton. So maybe what we'll see is more of that federalist vote going to the Liberals. But there's another element to this, which is, do you want to vote for the Bloc? Do you want to continue to be somebody in Quebec who is a sovereignist? When you have all of this mayhem happening and the President of the United States openly discussing that Canada is the 51st state of the Union, it's an important connotation for some of those sovereignist voters. Maybe they do want to see an independent Quebec at some point, but in an election like this one, they might think about it twice.
Thanks, Mario.
Thank you, Sarah.
That was Mario Canseco, president of Research Co.